Hello and welcome to the Viktor Frankl Meaning Academy, also home of the Meaning Project podcast, the Defiant Spirit podcast, and my good friend Dr. Baruch Halevi, his new project, Man Uprising, which hopefully we'll talk a little bit about. B, we recorded a banger of a podcast just 2 weeks ago. It was joyful, it was sad, people laughed, people cried, cats were dancing, and we never put it out, B, because we didn't hit the record button properly. Have
Well,
you recovered from what that mistake 2 weeks ago?
I don't remember what we talked about. I just remember that we dressed like spy versus spy, and we did it again. So not even planning.
And I feel as though we were the opposite spies last time. You were white, I was black, and now we've reversed course. Spy versus spy, part of Mad Magazine, way back in ancient times, as B remembers them. I was just a young pup then. I think B was a little bit more mature though.
Yeah, I was like in college back in the 70s or 80s. Yeah. So I know we have an important message because I do remember the important message because it wasn't ours. It was Dr. Viktor Frankl's. So let's jump into it, as I know so many of our listeners are looking for what not to read this summer, right? What's on your reading list? And of course, if you're sitting on a beach, if you're on a boat, if you're on a train, if you're on a plane, I feel like this is a cat in the hat thing, then you should be reading, of course, Man's Search for Meaning. And here's why. Take it away, Dr. Dan.
Absolutely. If you're on a beach, on a boat, in a train, on a plane, I think I just did do Dr. Seuss there. You should absolutely be reading about the horrific concentration camps of World War II. What better way to spend your summer vacation? And I say that with a little bit of therapeutic humor, but no, in all actuality, we are so privileged to be on a boat, on a plane, in a train, whatever, to have these opportunities. Sometimes it's helpful to recall that life's not always that great, that we'll end that vacation at some point. We'll come back to life in reality. And when we do, sometimes there's suffering and there's ways to deal with that.
Well, and just to qualify your beach read, I mean, I know it sounds a little jarring or out of context to be reading about the Holocaust where you're sipping a Mai Tai, but however, this is not a typical Holocaust read. Of course, it's sad and tragic and, all those things. But one of the things I love about Viktor Frankl is he, as I say, flipped the script on the Holocaust or human suffering. It's not about the Holocaust, because his sort of guiding mantra that he said quite often was transforming tragedy into triumph. And I can't think of a better message while sitting on a beach to get back to that feeling of triumph, because that's the takeaway of this man's life, his legacy, and this important book.
That's absolutely where I was going to go. I mean, it is a tale of tragedy, but it is also a tale of triumph. He spent 3 years in the German concentration camps and fortunately was able to survive. And upon surviving, in a fever pitch, wrote this book in less than 2 weeks, just to get all of those thoughts out of his mind and onto paper so people could understand his experience, but not just understand it, not just read it, but to grow from it. And that's why the first part of the book, the first 100 pages, is about the concentration camps. It's about his experience. It's about actually making the choice to stay in Austria, the choice to support his family that he knew would inevitably lead to him going to the concentration camps. He had the opportunity to come to the United States to teach, to speak, and he said, no, I'm going to stay here with my family. And so there's just one triumphant, tragic moment that starts the book, but it is, the first 100 pages in his experience, in his assessment of the psychology of the concentration camps, are so many amazing bits of wisdom to take with you.
Yeah, I believe it's why the Library of Congress named this as one of the most important books of the previous century, because, it's timeless. There's these nuggets in there of just truth. And I do believe it's why it ranks so high still 80 years after the Holocaust. on all kinds of lists. It's not just Holocaust studies or Jewish studies or psychology studies. It's on the top of finance top bestseller lists and book and business bestseller lists and all kinds of lists that you wouldn't normally imagine a book like this. I mean, when you look at like the finance, I think it was on wallstreet.com. I saw it as a top 10, list, and it was behind all these obvious contenders for that particular list, books on finance. But why this one? Because truth transcends genre and it transcends context. And I think people now more than ever are looking for those sort of universal truths that work everywhere at all times.
Absolutely. This book is full of universal truths. Again, the first 100 pages, his story of the concentration camps, of going, of surviving, of being liberated, and what that was like, is full of just, like you said, transcendent information. It transcends genre, it transcends time. And in its timelessness, you and I have said this before, this is certainly a time we need this book. People need this book. People are struggling. People are suffering. And this book, ironically, amazingly, is a message of hope coming from one of the worst times in human history.
Now, Dan, let me challenge you because everybody knows who is listening that you're an uber geek. And
in multiple genres.
We could talk about, comic book superhero stuff. We could talk about, lots of things. Star Wars for sure, right? Like, I mean, you're just
cardigan sweaters, absolutely.
Like you just are. If you look up geek in the dictionary, you get Dan's picture. And there's no bigger geek on logotherapy than Dan. And I get this pushback all the time of, what do I do with the second half of the book? So work your magic and share with us. Geek out on this.
What do you do with the second half of the book? Logotherapy in a nutshell. You marinate in it. You baste in it. You just roll yourself in it because it is amazing. Yes, the first 100 pages, just kind of beautiful prose, the story of the concentration camps, and the next, really, I mean, it's probably only 30 pages, right? Logotherapy in a nutshell is the delicious psychology and philosophy and logotherapy and what you can take and do every day to find meaning in your life. It is the psychology nerd's dream. Obviously my dream. I mean, I dedicated the past however many years of my life to studying it. And it's truly beautiful. You're right. It makes me sad. Every time you say this, I'm just like, no, B, that can't be right. You say, well, everybody reads the first half of the book. Nobody, I can't even say it. Nobody reads the second half. It just crushes my soul. People, get out there and read this book and just get into logotherapy in a nutshell. Oh my God.
So Michelle called me, Dan's wife called me and said, Dan took me out on a beautiful romantic date out to the fields and a picnic lunch, and he read from me logotherapy in a nutshell.
That may have actually happened. I've been known to quote prolifically from you got me.
Some people read Shakespeare sonnets and Dr. Dan logotherapy in a nutshell. It's good. It's not that good, but it's good. And to get serious on it, it really distills logotherapy into a nutshell, into a very simple takeaway. Now, as I tell people, read the first half for sure. It's like 90 something pages. It's a good narrative. Not coincidentally, Dr. Frankl wrote over 30 books, 40 books or something. And this is the only one that sort of went viral, if you will. It became an international bestseller. I know Dan, is going to wax poetic on Dr. and the Soul and Viktor Frankl's other books, and they're all amazing, but they can be a little dense. They can be a little hard to read. So I do believe that if you're going to get a primer into logotherapy, it's a really easy way to do it.
Absolutely. It is a beautifully simple read. It is easy to get through, whereas so many of his other books are in such academic styles. You're right. I have to go back to Doctor and the Soul constantly because I'm not intelligent enough to read it in one sitting because it is so dense and sometimes so difficult to read. And that's one of his more simple ones. He was known, right? His writing style, I love this. His writing style was he would dictate to his wife, Ellie, who is still with us, that wonderful person that she is. He would dictate to Ellie, she would type for him and also edit while she was typing. And she would say, no, you have to say that more simply. And even with that, I mean, some of those, you know it, some of those books behind me are quite, Man's Search for Ultimate Meaning. Oh my goodness. I have to put it down like every 5 minutes and just think like, what is he saying here? Whereas Man's Search for Meaning is meant for all of us. So much simple goodness.
I don't know the answer to this question. Maybe you do. Were those books written in English or were they translated to English? I know many of them were not written in English, not as native language, but which was Doctor and the Soul and Man's Search for Meaning written in English? I don't know.
No. Doctor and the Soul. Artlich Sears. I can't do the German, man. I can't, I've usually just like glanced over it when it was, it was originally written. Most of his books were originally written in German and then
What about Man's
translated.
Search for Meaning?
Well, let's see. I would assume, because I mean, I would definitely think so. Probably translated many, many times because, it was right out of the concentration camp. It had to have been, right? Because if you listen to him speaking, he's some great YouTube videos out there. His grandson Alex is cultivating a digital library of all these videos. Keep tuned for that. That should be released here soon. But it had to have been because he just came out of the concentration camps and fired that one off. And remember, we did talk about this last time that we unrecorded our session. He actually wanted to publish Man's Search for Meaning anonymously. And it was literally just days before it went to the publishers that his friends convinced him, hey, you've got to put your name on this. You've got to let people know that this is you writing that. Why would he want to do this anonymously?
I mean, I don't know the answer, but I speculate that he was writing, like it's a fine line. The man became famous and also, probably quite wealthy, I imagine, with the amount of books it sold on the back of an atrocity that, his wife was murdered and his family was murdered and millions of others were murdered. And it's a delicate thing to become famous and to gain wealth based on that. Now, we know is he put that to good. He did so much good with it. It allowed him to scale his message. So I, as a Jew, as a rabbi, don't begrudge him at all. I'm grateful that he did it, but I can imagine the mixed feelings that he had attaching his name to it for that reason.
Well, let's dive into that a little bit because the theories of logotherapy were formed well before his time in the concentration camps. He was a successful physician, philosopher, neurologist. He operated many helpful clinics, youth camps to try to help people. It was the concentration camps and the subsequent writing of Man's Search for Meaning that, like you said, took those ideas and made them and took them viral.
Well, I'm not arguing. I don't think anybody's arguing that logotherapy wasn't his trademark and like that wasn't due to or invented in the Holocaust. But what I do believe, again, this is just my belief, is that the reason why this man's philosophy has so much traction is because of the Holocaust. We've talked about it before, but take positive psychology, Martin Seligman or Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, the founders of positive psychology. I know, hard name, makes Baruch look simple.
Is that the author of Flow? Did you get that name? Again, that's another word I just skim right over. I'm like, oh yeah, that Russian dude.
Yeah, he's the author of Flow. He's one of the founders of positive psychology, and Tall, I forget his name, Israeli guy, but whatever. It was born out at basically Harvard University in the late 20th century, in air conditioning and while sipping cappuccinos. So like that has a different weight to me than this man who, although logotherapy wasn't born in Auschwitz, it certainly was bared out, proven out in Auschwitz. If it can endure that level of testing, if you will, then it can endure the sufferings that we go through, outside of the Holocaust. And I think that that's the grappling part, I have to believe, with Viktor Frankl or Elie Wiesel or so many of these, great examples of men and women who went on to transform tragedy into triumph. But you're doing it on the back of so much suffering that I think Viktor Frankl was conflicted with that.
Understandably, that makes sense. But I mean, yeah, that's the nature of what we share, is turning tragedy into triumph. And that's what he did. He took that tragedy, and not just his own personal triumph, but for all of us. We all have an opportunity to grow and to learn from this now.
So I hear this all the time, and I'd like to put it out to you since you're the logotherapy geek. You probably hear this too, and that is, hey, Dan, like, I don't know if I feel comfortable reading this on the beach. Do I deserve this? Or I'm facing, a divorce, or I'm going through a cancer diagnosis. But honestly, my suffering compared to his suffering doesn't compare. And I feel bad, or I feel like I don't know, I shouldn't be comparing it. What do you do with, I'm sure you've heard that. What do you do with those types of reactions to either Viktor Frankl or Man's Search for Meaning?
Well, ironically, I was just reading that earlier this morning, where he talks about, in one of my many highlights. Look, the whole book is highlighted now in different ways, but one of my highlights shares this idea that when we suffer, we are all consumed by our suffering, regardless of what it is or the degree of it. So there's no need to compare. We all suffer, and our suffering is uniquely ours, and we experience it uniquely. So there's no need for us to compare our suffering to anybody else's. Yes, you might be struggling through a divorce or financial ruin or a job change or difficulties with your children. Is that the concentration camps of World War II? Absolutely not. But is it your own personal concentration camp? Are you suffering? Are you struggling? Absolutely. And that's where this book is so wonderful in being able to help you. You don't need to compare your suffering to anybody else's. You can't compare your suffering to that of the people, the Jews, everybody that went through the concentration camps of World War II and survived or died there. We can't compare ourselves to that, but we can find meaning in our suffering, just as Dr. Frankl writes to us.
Great. Thank you. That's a good response. So what about another issue that comes up, and that is, hey, I'd like to find meaning on the beach or the mountaintops. I mean, do I have to find it in the Holocaust? Do I have to find it in my divorce? Do I have to find it in cancer? Can't I find it while taking a cruise with my family on Royal Caribbean, which is where we're headed in a few weeks? Isn't that possible, Dr. Dan?
Well, yeah. Those are the fun places to find meaning, right? Like, yeah, we all want to do that. I'm about to find meaning here in a couple hours when the Running Man and his family show up, and we have a barbecue and hang out and talk about the amazing Viktor Frankl Meaning Academy, Meaning Project, Defiant Spirit podcast. That's going to be really meaningful. It's going to be fun. It's going to be lovely. Those are the easy times to find meaning, B. You better find meaning in your divorce, in your financial struggles, in your difficult children. Those are the places where we need meaning. Because if we can't find it there, life becomes pretty abysmal. Life becomes difficult to live. We start to, feel that existential angst, that question of, why am I here? Why am I doing this? Because you have to find meaning there.
So that's one of the principles for anybody listening. There's many principles, but I think Dr. Frankl even called them the three foundational principles. And the first one is life has meaning under all circumstances. Either life is meaningless, you can make that case, I hope you don't, or it's meaningful. And if it's meaningful, then it's under all circumstances. 2 + 2 = 4, whether you like it or not, in good times or the bad times, right? It's a truth. And so that is a foundational truth within logotherapy.
Absolutely. You have to find meaning in all life situations, or else it is truly meaningless. Which then brings, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, which then brings me, B, we're going to change that word. I'm not a logotherapy nerd. I'm a logo nerd, right? We're going to take the therapy, right? Just because logotherapy is more than just a therapy. It is quite the misnomer. He did develop a form of therapy, logotherapy, the psychology of meaning, but these principles are so much more universal than just to be used in therapy. We can all use them at home on a daily basis, and that's why everybody should read this book this summer.
Well, I would just push back a little on that and just agree with you, except for the technical term. I'm going to work in some terms here. Is therapy is therapia, the Greek, I think is Greek, healing. And so, I mean, that's what Dr. Frankl meant by it is healing through meaning or wholeness through meaning. And I know that's what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree with you that logotherapy in this day and age is limited because then people think it's something I do behind an office door with a trained therapist, when in fact, you and I have been really working to expand the parameters or the limits of logotherapy, and getting rid of that word sort of helps us. But at its deepest level, I do believe that's true, that we heal through meaning. Has that been your experience?
Absolutely, heal through meaning. I love that idea. We can also go back to the idea, if these were written in German, they were written in German, right? The actual initial phrasing for logotherapy was existential analysis, right? But he thought, that's a little too wordy. So, I think logotherapy is the Americanization of existential analysis. But yes, finding life, finding meaning brings me to the third part of the book, right? Everybody, you should read the narrative story of the concentration camps, and please marinate yourself in logotherapy in a nutshell. But the final section was written much later, and that was the case for tragic optimism, which I believe was a speech of his in the 70s or 80s that is now included in the later revisions and publications of that book. And basically, the case for tragic optimism talks about just what you were saying, B. We are all subject to the tragic triad of human existence: pain, guilt, and death. Right? So he summarizes the suffering of human existence in those three factors: pain, guilt, and death. We know there's so much more, but with the tragic triad, he provides tragic optimism, how we turn the hows and whys of turning suffering into achievement. The idea that life is short. We're all going to die. We say this often. And if life is short, you only have today to do something amazing. And hopefully you get tomorrow and more days, but damn it, you got today. Do something amazing with it. And if you're feeling guilty, again, do something with it. Guilt, I've been saying this a lot lately to get some raised eyebrows from my clients. Guilt is a blessing. Shame is a curse, but guilt can be a blessing in recognizing, wow, I messed up. I need to do something different. I need to turn that around. Allow that guilt to change your behavior.
So good. So true. And in that, what's in that called? The epilogue. What's that last part called again? The third part of the book? There's a name for it.
The
Forgot what
humanization of psychotherapy, maybe, or something like that.
Yeah, it's like an essay. I mean, it's an
Yeah.
add-on, but whatever you want to call it. That's where he quotes one of his students, Jerry, I forgot his name. Long, yeah, who becomes a paraplegic. Long story, but the bottom line was Jerry Long coined the term "the defiant power of the human spirit," to which Viktor Frankl ran with, which is what I have branded on my arm as well as my behind me and my sign. And the defiant power of the human spirit is really an essential component of logotherapy and a differential or logo living, meaning-centered living. And I know this, sharing with our our folks, but also I think it's one of the reasons why Man's Search for Meaning is so popular, is because it's the first, I would argue, it's the only true psychotherapy that factors in the human spirit, not as a tangential conversation, but as a central conversation. And now more than ever before, we live in a world that's hungry for spirituality. I don't meet too many people who deny a spirituality. They may talk about it on their terms. I just don't meet too many people who say, they're pure atheists, that there's nothing more than the human being than flesh and blood and all of the nitty gritty. And we live in a time now more than ever where many people are unchurched, unsynagogued, don't have the structures and the dogmas of religious, past. But we need something. We want something, and that's why you read Man's Search for Meaning, and it's a sophisticated spirituality that really, for me, gives me so much to hang my hat on.
That's such a great point. Logotherapy was the first school of psychotherapy to recognize human beings are more than just mind and body, but that we also have a spirit. And this was, in the 30s and 40s, Dr. Frankl's writing about this and understanding it and refining this idea. And then decades later, we have research saying, oh yeah, spirituality is good for you. People that express or live in with some kind of spiritual sense, recognizing some kind of spirituality, are 80% happier, 80% more, find more meaning. They're healthier, happier, more meaningful existences. Just recognizing, man, I'm not in control of everything. There's something out there greater than me. And sometimes I need to engage in it. Sometimes I need to worship it. There are ways to express this spirituality. And when we do this, at first it refines what that idea means, right? We can identify mind and body, but spirituality, that's a hard one. But when we engage in spiritual practices, we refine it, we gain better understanding. And through that, we become healthier, more meaningful human beings.
Yeah, and I think one of the greatnesses of this book or this philosophy is that it transcends typical boundaries and borders. I can see why this book is resonated in business settings with business types, because it speaks about a spirituality that's grounded, that's not, woo woo. And yet I can see why it speaks to the spiritual seekers, because it can be taken as woo woo, as, spirituality. And so it works for Christians. I know it's been very popular in Christian circles. It works clearly for Jews, comes out of the Jewish experience. Friend or acquaintance of mine is teaching this in Turkey, and she's Muslim. And so, where there's oftentimes conflicts in the Middle East, I'm sure you've heard about them. This book isn't one of them. And this philosophy is a bridge builder. I think that's another uniqueness about this man in this book.
I absolutely agree. I mean, we have centers for logotherapy or institutes for logotherapy, training logotherapists and spreading the message of Dr. Frankl. Just off the top of my head, I'm thinking of people I've met from Russia, from Ireland, South Africa, Israel, South America. As a continent, right? I loves this book. I've met people from all walks of life there. This is a universal message that you should read this summer during this wonderful time of where most of us find rest and relaxation and try to mitigate any suffering like work and relationships. This is a great opportunity to take the time to read this book.
And for those listening in America right now, we're heading into a very divisive political season. And I just think the more things that can unify us, the better. And now more than ever, we need unification across all these religious, political, socioeconomic, blah, blah, blah lines. Like, it's time. This is a unifying mission and message. And let's just do that. Let's just do that.
Yeah, we are all human beings on a path seeking and discovering meaning in our lives. If we could focus on that more and the divisiveness less, it sure would be, well, there may be less suffering for us to work on, but it sure would be a nicer place. Be a lot more cruises and beaches than difficult news commentary, newscasts. So that's why. Go ahead, B.
No,
well, that's why everybody should read this. The more of us that read this and practice these principles, I believe, the happier, healthier, more meaningful our families are. If we have more meaningful families, we can't help but impact our communities. And impacting our communities, we affect the world.
Yeah, and I'll end on my end with a quote from Dr. Frankl that there are only two races, the decent and the indecent. And this is for all of the decent folks out there, and that's everybody listening to this podcast, who want to really bring decency, goodness, meaning back to a world that needs decency and goodness and meaning now more than ever before. And just sitting on the beach and reading this book and internalizing these ideas and living them out in your life is a way to spread decency. And so that's why I say get out there and enjoy your summer and read this book.
not only read this book, but you make a good point, B. The decent and the indecent. Be a decent human being. Buy 2 copies of the book. Read it yourself and give somebody else a copy. It's a brief book. It's a wonderful book. It's an inexpensive book. Share the message. And while you're sharing the book, hey, it wouldn't hurt but to share this amazing podcast with these 2 wonderful logotherapists trying to share the messages of Dr. Frankl. So get out there, be decent, share the messages of logotherapy, but definitely get into it yourself. And as always, get out there and live your life with meaning, purpose, and resilience.
Have a great summer, my friend, and I'm sure we'll resume somewhere in the midst of this summer and beyond with our shared love of all things Dr. Viktor Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning.
You know it, bud. Have an amazing summer, and hey, happy Father's Day with the Halevi brood and everybody over there.
To you as well, and apologize to Michelle for dragging her into this conversation, and hopefully you'll read her more than just love sonnets from Logotherapy in a Nutshell.
There is a chapter in Doctrine of the Soul called The Meaning of Love, and she has heard it prolifically. Let me tell you, she knows. She could probably quote it as she's rolling her eyes. So once you're done with Man's Search for Meaning, definitely read Doctrine of the Soul. You'll understand my wife's suffering.
All right, brother. Until the next time, meaning, purpose, resilience. Talk to you then.
Take care.